What is next for Theresa May and the deal?
Well, we are certainly in political uncertain times because, as it stands, Parliament has legislated for a no deal on the 29th of March. So what is next? Theresa May, the Prime Minister, is going to talk to the various parties and is going to go back with a new motion on Monday, as we believe. But let me just first say that there are very good relationships between the UK and African countries. It's a growing dynamic relationship. The UK is the second largest investor in Africa. It invests $55 billion in the continent. In this part, there are quite a lot of exports from African countries going to the UK. It's worth about $17 billion now, $billion. Now, if there is a no deal, then we need to see what is the legal basis for these exports entering the UK market. Currently, these African exports entering the EU and the UK on the preferential arrangement, or mostly. If there is a no deal, then the UK Parliament will have to legislate for new trading relationships between the UK and African countries, including new preference scheme, including new trade deals. But UK Parliament is very congested at the moment in terms of getting legislation through. So that's very unlikely to happen. So it might be the case that we have and a no deal, and Parliament cannot cannot approve of new legislation, an extension of a preference scheme, for example. And in that case, African exports will need to enter the UK on the WTO rules, on the WTO terms, which means no preferential access, and that can have severe consequences.
All right. Dirk, of course, before we touch base with the African exports and, of course, the trade affairs with UK, how about we just look quickly into some of the numbers? We did see there about 130 execs calling on to Theresa's government to say that when they voted for Brexit, they didn't necessarily understand what the whole deal was about, and are calling for the government to actually rethink this, and calling on both of the parties and the parliamentarians to actually support the people's vote. Should we at any point are we yet to see a no Brexit deal like come March 29th?
Well, currently, as it stands, there is no deal between the EU and the United Kingdom. There has been a negotiation between Theresa May and the European Union, and that deal has been voted down decisively by, as you say, a large majority. And that means that currently, as it stands, Parliament would leave, or the UK would leave the EU. Now, there can only be a couple of things that can happen. The UK government would have to revoke Article 50, which means that it would not exit the EU, or it would ask for a longer transition arrangement or some extension. But the EU, of course, would need to approve of that as well. Then that is the current situation, and it's highly uncertain what is going to happen.
Of course, we did see Tony Blair there coming in and saying that the only feasible way to go is if they asked the people whether they still want to get out of the EU, and saying that politicians should not waste any much time and more on fantasies. But now let's get back a little bit to that African trade conversation. We did see just a few years ago, of course, there a deal with Kenya, a trade deal on flour exports that would work very good for the flour exportation. We understand that, of course, Kenya is one of the biggest flour growers in the east of the continent, of course, with Ethiopia there. But if the UK leaves EU, it might be rather very, very hard, and it might cost Kenya billions of dollars. Tell me, what do we...
So these are uncertain times. So if under a deal scenario between the UK and EU, then there would be a transition period up until the end of 2020, and during that period, the UK would transition the arrangement that the EU has with East African countries, including Kenya, to the UK. So it would have some time until the end of 2020. If that isn't the case, so if there is a no deal, then there isn't a legal basis for Kenyan trade to enter the UK under preferential terms. So in that case, it would have to enter on the WTO terms, and it would face tariffs. And we estimate at ODI that that would cost African exporters about $2 billion extra payments, and I think that's going to be a huge effect. So if the African continent doesn't get its preferences renewed, its preferential deals, then it would cost $2 billion. And so you mentioned about a Kenyan export. That would be they would face similar challenges if there is no additional announcement from the UK government in case of a no deal.
All right. Now, just before I let you go, Dirk, of course, we understand that it's not just Britain that wants to leave the EU. Of course, we've seen several countries, including Italy, and of course, some other countries that hinted about this. Do you think at any point, even if Britain leaves the EU, the European Union would make it easy for the EU economy?
Well, I don't think it would make it easier for the UK economy. I think countries gain from deep regional integration. I think it's really important to foster more integration, just as it is important for the African continent now to have a dynamism behind integration. And it's really important to be thinking about this. If you don't integrate more, if you actually make it harder to trade amongst the countries, you will face an uncertain time, you will face more frictions across your borders, you will have fewer trade, you will have lower incomes, GDP will be lower than it would otherwise have been the case. And in, for example, the case of a no-deal Brexit, even the government's own forecasts suggest that British incomes would be about 8% lower than would otherwise have been the case 15 years later. And so that decline in GDP, coupled with a highly uncertain exchange rate, and the pound is expected also to devalue by more than 10% again, that will also have major effects, not just on the UK economy, not just in Europe, but also globally, and also including on African trading partners as well. So if there's lower growth and a lower pound, that means that there's fewer African exports going to the UK, to the EU, and also the cost at which it happens is also higher. So that would be a double whammy. It would have to pay higher import duties, and there's lower import demand from the UK, from the EU. So there will be a double whammy for African exporters in case of a no deal.
All right. Thank you very much.